Good day and welcome to NBP Hot Seat. My name is Zaf Coelho from Nuclear Business Platform. Joining me today is Mr. George Borovas, who is the head of nuclear from Hunton Andrews Kurth. George advises governments, lenders, and sponsors on the development of civilian nuclear power programs and the financing and construction of nuclear power plants. He has worked on projects and transactions globally. Hunton has unique experience advising governments on program development, including the UAE and Egypt. The firm has a full scope nuclear practice advising on most high profile nuclear power projects around the world. Welcome, George. We are delighted to have you with us today on NBP Hot Seat.
Great to be here, Zaf. Great to see you again. And thank you very much for having me on the hot seat.
Wonderful, wonderful. George, firstly, congratulations on your new role with Hunton. It must be very exciting and a very perhaps challenging opportunity for you also, George.
Well, it is, I've been practicing law for 22 years now, and all of the years have been on nuclear. I've spent time in the United States, in London, in the Middle East, and now in Tokyo. And this is certainly a great move as I'm looking at the global nuclear marketplace, because Hunton has had a very traditional old nuclear practice. Has been going back many decades, but now we have a vision that we share here of creating a global nuclear practice that's going to be advising the global nuclear industry with a concentration on advising governments on the development of new nuclear programs. So we're very excited, and we have a big team in Asia, in the Middle East, in London, as well as in the United States.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, George, given your vast experience having worked on several new nuclear programs, you must be very familiar with some of the key challenges facing new nuclear programs. Now, in your personal and humble opinion, what are the top three challenges facing new nuclear programs, George?
Well, there's certainly a lot of challenges, but there are some challenges that I think I've seen in every nuclear program, and they're all kind of interrelated. One of them is just very general, just about project risk, understanding the risk of the project, but also the fact that you're standing up an industry. When you're putting together a nuclear power plant, it's just not one power plant. You're actually creating a whole industry that needs the support for the power plant to be effective. So that's one issue. The other issue, which is seen very typically quickly once you start getting into the discussions, is the issue of financing. Who's going to be financing? Who are going to be the investors? What are the lenders going to require? What kind of requirements they have? Because a lot of lenders are not very familiar with nuclear and the risks that come with nuclear. Finally, very important, and this is like a long lead item for any country that's looking into nuclear, is the issue of human resources. Having people that are capable of understanding, developing, and leading a nuclear program takes a long time. You certainly, in a country that has not had nuclear in the past, you need to import some of that expertise by others, but you also need to start training your own people for the long-term future. So all these three things together are the biggest challenges that I've seen.
So among these three challenges, human resource, financing, and also project development risk, which would you rank in terms of for countries to be putting greater emphasis on, George?
Well, I don't think there's one that we could just say that's the most important. I think all of them together. As I said, the risk factor, the risk analysis would necessarily touch upon financing. So if you address the project risk, the financiers are going to feel more comfortable. Same thing, the financiers are going to feel more comfortable if they look to a country and they say, okay, here are the human resources that are going to lead this effort. So they're all of them interconnected. There's not one that you can just say that's the most important, or second, or third, or fourth. They all have to be addressed.
Correct. So given your observations of some of the past programs and also personally on your personal involvement in some of the program, perhaps you could share some of the best practices that you have experienced or seen of some countries as they embark on their programs and on these three key items that we mentioned: human resource development, financing, and project development risk. Perhaps you could share on some of the best practices that you have seen, George.
Certainly. First of all, let's start with the issue of human resources. I think number one is the most important for best practices is the recognition that you do need to develop these human resources. Sometimes in some countries, I've seen an attitude where they say, well, we have very knowledgeable people and they can help us. We don't need the nuclear specific expertise. And while the people are extremely competent and very capable because they've delivered other energy projects or major infrastructure projects, nuclear is very, very specific and it has its own challenges. So while the people that are in the country that have developed major infrastructure projects are extremely useful and have a lot to contribute, you still need to have that nuclear specific expertise. So first is to recognize that you need that. And then to start setting up a plan, a long-term plan about how you're going to develop that. So you have to start thinking, okay, who are going to be the people who are going to help me lead the project now? And in 20 years from now, where am I going to find the operators? Where am I going to find the engineers? What does that mean? It means that you have to start engaging, first of all, with international organizations like the IAEA to start understanding the requirements, the best practices, international best practices, but also starting to engage with the different countries around the world that have nuclear programs. So for instance, when you're starting to develop a program, you want to start developing a lot of nuclear engineering capabilities. Typically, in most countries, you will not find a nuclear energy engineering program. So you want to have an exchange program with places like the United States or France or Russia or China, where there are nuclear engineering programs, so you can start developing. So developing those relationships early on and engaging with the global nuclear industry is very important.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. I guess George, having shared all this experience, I guess if you could offer a key message for countries embarking on new nuclear program, and there are a whole bunch of them today, from Asia all the way to Africa, what would be your key message for these countries, George?
It's first of all, it's a very positive message. I think that nuclear can be, in many respects, a great answer to a lot of the challenges that countries around the world are facing for clean energy and sustainable development. So it is a very positive because sometimes, us people in the nuclear industry focus on the challenges and the negatives, but I do think there's a very, very positive message. Now, having said that, there are things that you need to do to address the challenges, and that means engaging early, understanding the problems, and engaging early with the global nuclear industry to understand what are the challenges particular to your country and to find solutions that make sense for that. So that engagement and that discussion and understanding the communicating, first of all, what are your objectives as a country? What is it that you want from the nuclear program? Is it purely power? You just need power. Or is it development of a nuclear program in the sense of technology and technology transfer? Those are completely different approaches. So once you have very clear objectives of what you want to accomplish as a country, then you can go to the marketplace and start having these discussions. Sometimes what we've seen is that countries have a mixed message that confuses the nuclear countries, the nuclear exporting countries, and the nuclear vendors. So for instance, if you have a situation where you want to develop just power without any technology transfer, without creating local jobs, and it's just an issue of creating sufficient power, then it's one approach of one way you're going to approach the nuclear industry. But if you want to develop some kind of partnership where you're going to develop a local industry, there's another way of doing that. So I think having that very clear criteria about what are your objectives as a country is the number one step.
Okay, wonderful. I guess the issue sometimes, George, again, this is from my own personal observation, is, for many of these so-called democratic countries, the governments keep on changing every couple of years. And sometimes along that, objectives change along the way. So it makes it very challenging sometimes, also, I guess, for countries exporting technologies when they are dealing with such countries whereby they kind of flip-flop. So yes, it's quite crucial to establish a clear understanding of what the main objectives are. But apart from that, George, any other advice that you would recommend for governments as they embark on their nuclear energy program?
Well, I think that's a very good point, Zaf. I mean, I think that when you look at the landscape around the world and you see countries that change their views on developing a nuclear program after one election, that is a challenge. And vendors and exporters are very weary of that because they are going to spend a lot of time and a lot of resources in order to approach a country. And if they're worried that, well, when the next election comes, everything can be scrapped and all the plans that they had are going to go away, which happens very often, then that's going to be a problem. So developing some kind of consensus within government and the opposition, consensus within the public and public acceptance. So this becomes ingrained into the public that this is a good thing, as opposed to hearing about the potential challenges and hearing about the accidents only and the danger supposedly that's with nuclear. So that message in public acceptance and getting people to understand why is it beneficial to them, why their life is going to be better with a nuclear program, is very important in order to develop that societal but also political consensus. Once you have that, then you're not subject to political changes every time there is an election.
Fantastic, fantastic. George, I really appreciate you providing all your insights. It's been fascinating having this conversation with you. Thank you once again for taking the time to join us today on NBP Hot Seats. I sincerely believe that, the world will be a much better place with nuclear energy playing a bigger role. Climate change is real. It's not a figment of imagination, and countries are right to consider nuclear energy for their country's sustainability and development. And yes, they should seriously consider some of the key challenges and best practices to overcome them, as you mentioned earlier. And we sincerely wish you all the best in your new role, George. Thank you once again, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you very much, Zaf. Always a pleasure to talk. And the only thing I can say is I violently agree with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, take care, stay safe. This is Zaf Coelho signing out, and hope to see you guys again. Bye-bye.